In this episode, we meet Jill Hawkey, Executive Director of the Christchurch Methodist Mission, where she has spent 12 years growing a service spanning early childhood to end-of-life care. Jill trained as a social worker, spent 25 years in international aid and development, and returned to Christchurch just before the 2011 earthquakes. In this episode, Jill talks about what she has watched Housing First deliver in Christchurch: decreases in hospitalisation, decreases in mental health admissions, people who were homeless now on staff, and why over 100 people are currently receiving Housing First support while still sleeping on the street because the housing simply does not exist to put them in. She talks about New Zealand's social housing stock sitting at 4% when Australia is at 16%, and much of Europe is in the 20s and 30s, and why the private sector will never build the 1- and 2-bedroom accessible homes that low-income households actually need. She makes the case for a cross-party 10-year housing strategy, 1 percentage point a year, insulated from electoral cycles, and that if we start from housing as a human right, everything else follows. More information on this interview can be found in the episode description. And don't forget to subscribe to the Char Hub podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from.
Jill, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Hey, just to start off, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to the work that you do with the Methodist Mission South Island.
Oh, it's a bit of a complicated question. So after I finished school, I did a social work degree and then did social work for a number of years in Christchurch and then in London. And then I got into international aid and development for the next kind of 20, 25 years.
Yes, you do.
Yep, going to prove my age. And then came back to Ōtautahi, back to Christchurch, just prior to the Christchurch earthquakes. So ended up doing some contract work for the next few years. And then in 2014, the Methodist Mission were looking for an executive director. So I applied for the role, and in 2014, September, that's when I started. So I've now been there for 12 years.
Okay, and the breadth and depth of the services of the Methodist Mission, can you just give us a bit of a sense of the scope of work that you're involved in?
Yeah, we say that we've got services from the cradle to the grave, really. So we've got a preschool, which is a preschool and whānau support hub for low-income whānau. Then we have social workers in schools and work with the Mana Ake program, which is supporting the mental well-being of tamariki. We do some contract work for Oranga Tamariki and also for the Ministry of Health. And then at the other end of life spectrum, we run a home and hospital called Wesley Care, which is a 108-room rest home and hospital for older people, and also provides palliative care. And then on top of that, we've got our housing work, and that's been the fastest growing area of our work in the last 10 years.
Yep. You do have other roles in the community housing space, and I'm interested just to ask you to explain a little bit about the Te Waipounamu South Island Community Housing Providers Network and what that does and who that brings together and why.
Yeah, we've got a really good history of collaboration across Te Waipounamu. So it's primarily the Christchurch-based community housing providers, but also brings in people from Queenstown and people from Nelson from time to time. And this is an opportunity for us to come together, often also with government agencies, with local authority, and to talk about what are the housing issues that are impacting on us at the moment. So it's really about sharing information, looking for opportunities to collaborate, and occasionally we collaborate and do something together. So we meet only every second month for a couple of hours, but it's a great way of staying connected with each other. And we really are committed to that collaboration. And because of that, when it came to Housing First and looking at how we would deliver Housing First in Ōtautahi, then a group of 5-6 agencies actually came together and formed a collaborative management approach to Housing First.
And that's a good example of a collaboration that's working well. What's the result of that been thus far?
Oh, it's huge. It's changed over time because now that initiative has been going for 7 years. So it has changed over that time. To begin with, we all seconded staff in, but now all of the staff actually do come under the Methodist Mission. But everyone has their different roles. So Emerge, Comcare, Ōtautahi Community Housing Trust and the Methodist Mission are all tenancy managers, and we all put housing forward. And one of us might lease a house from the private sector for Housing First, or it might be our own stock. And then so that's the kind of housing part. And then there's the support services team that works. And the new outreach team, we've got staff who are seconded into that team, again, from those member organisations.
And is it fair to say that in terms of those supports, they're multidisciplinary?
Yes, to a certain extent. A lot of them are key workers, whānau support workers or social workers with the whānau team, and of course our peer support workers, tenancy managers. So multidisciplinary, and then we contract in services from a local health provider.
Yeah, okay.
For our physical and mental
so there's
health
that
services.
connection between housing and health, housing and social.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, got it. How does New Zealand compare internationally in public housing availability? I'm aware New Zealand is below or around about 4% of total available housing stock as public or affordable housing, compared to 16% across the ditch, and in some countries large double digits into 20s, 30s, 40s. And what sort of impact do you think that's having on us in New Zealand society?
I think that's one of our major problems in our housing system at the moment, that our social housing, our affordable housing, is such a small percentage of the housing stock, which makes it really difficult when it comes for people who don't have a lot of money to actually find a place to live. If you look now at the average rents, we were just looking yesterday in Christchurch, ridiculous, $550 a week for a one-bedroom house. Out at Sumner, $620. Who can actually afford that as a single person? It's just not possible.
So drawing on that and focusing in on one particular cohort, we have begun to see a wave of older adults come through to fixed low-income retirement on the pension. A rent of $500 or $600 when you're receiving how much? I don't know what the pension is, I have to confess, but it certainly doesn't sound affordable. Is it fair to say, I'm aware you're shining a light on older adult housing inadequacy and persistent unmet need for older adults. Can you tell us a little bit about that campaign?
Yeah, we run Wesley Village, which is a village for older persons housing. It's predominantly affordable housing. Some of it is social housing as well. We've got about 70 units across the village. It also includes a small 8-bedroom whare for whare tiaki, which is for kaumātua Māori, which is more supported housing. But what we noticed when I first started, we'd look at the social housing register and there would be no over 65s on it. And then we saw an increasing number of people coming to us in housing distress. And when we looked then at the social housing register, we saw that the percentage increase in the over 65-year-olds was greater than any other age group. Started from a smaller base, but was growing at a faster level.
That would be a surprise to many New Zealanders, I think, who have a different idea around who's on that list.
I think it would be. And it's something that we don't talk about in terms of older people's homelessness. But when we started our outreach service at the end of last year, the first person that we housed in that service was an 86-year-old woman. So, we have got an issue with older people in real housing distress. And we were seeing it coming through our door more and more. And we stopped and had a look at the research and we said, all of the research has been done. All of the research says this is a growing problem, that we've got a wave of older people who have rented all their lives, home ownership levels are going down, at the same time that there's a rising older population. We've got a problem. And that's what we're seeing, and that's what we're seeing now. And so,
what are we going to do about that? Is that and who's going to be the actors in that? I think role clarity is one of the greatest defining aspects of successful outcomes.
Yeah.
And obviously we have community groups, we have faith groups, we have local governments, we have central government. How can we stitch something together there where everybody's playing to their strengths and doing the best they can?
It's got to be a joined up approach, but it does need government funding. It is going to need government investment, and we need to start seeing it as a good investment, because certainly if older people are moving into supported communities of good, solid, healthy housing, they're not going to need to go into rest home level care or hospital level care at such a young age. They're not going to have as many frequent admissions into public hospital. It's actually going to end up being a government saving, but the government's going to have to be willing to invest into it to be able to make it stack up. The reality is the private sector is not going to build affordable one-bedroom homes for older people, so it's got to come from somewhere. I think the community sector has got a real role to play in the wraparound support that it provides. And at Wesley Village, we've got a really strong community of neighbours who look out for each other. They've established their own tenants committee, they've got their own tenants newsletter, they have movie nights, they've set up a walking group, they have games afternoons. They've done all of this because they're part of a supportive, secure community, and they know that we're on tap if they need us, but actually they're just getting on and creating their own lives and doing their own thing.
Jill, I'm aware that there is a rising occurrence of women's homelessness in New Zealand and that there's emerging data that provides evidence of that. Can you speak to that a little bit, please? Because you've got a leading role in the Coalition to End Women's Homelessness, and I'm just interested to hear that perspective.
Well, we know from the statistics and the research that's been done that women make up 50% of the homeless population. They may not be as visible on the streets, but actually they make up 50% of the population. In Ōtautahi, we know that in terms of our outreach services, about 30% of the people who we come across are women. But then, of course, you've got all your transitional housing services, which is women with children, and that will certainly make up the numbers to the 50%. We're also seeing more older women in housing distress, and often that's because they haven't been able to earn as much over their lifetime. They'll have much lower KiwiSaver, if they've got KiwiSaver at all. They will have had gaps from raising children or the pay equity issue, so they haven't been paid as well. So yeah, when they get to retirement, they don't have the buffer that often their men folk have. And also, if a woman divorces in their 40s or 50s, it may be that the male is able to go out and get another mortgage and able to afford that because he's got the income to be able to come in, whereas the woman might not have the income and so continues to rent and then is much more vulnerable when she gets to retirement age.
Well, thank you for continuing to reveal that, because it is largely invisible. It's much more hidden, and it's really important, I think, to bring that to the surface and to shine a light on it. I'm going to ask about homelessness, and there's a battle of narratives occurring in around the world, but particularly in New Zealand at the moment, with the mischaracterisation, that's my view, of homeless and rough sleeping as an enforcement issue and a criminal issue, whereas I see it much more as a health and manaaki response as the appropriate way to respond. And it's in the public discourse, it's in the media, and people are saying, and repeatedly, that people are choosing to be homeless. And I'm just wanting to unpack that a little bit, because in meetings recently with ministers, I've heard them asking, well, where are these people coming from? And our providers have responded and said, well, Minister, frequently they're coming from corrections. They're being released from prison with no housing plan, no resources to find a housing. They're being discharged from emergency departments of hospitals into homelessness. And so agencies of the state are directly linked in bringing homelessness into existence. And in the UK, one example that we've become aware of is in Wales, where there is a duty of care and some accountability and responsibility to all agencies of the Crown. And we as community providers, I'm sure, would agree to sign up to that same duty of care and hold ourselves accountable. It's working really well there. It's been in place for more than 10 years now. It's significantly reduced the homelessness rates in Wales and retained that decrease in homelessness, even despite the interruptions of COVID. And I'm wondering whether you think something like this might work in a New Zealand context to get people working together better.
We need to put a different lens on homelessness. And as you say, change the kind of rhetoric from this is of a person's own making to, in fact, a duty to care. And I think that's what we actually need to be looking for. And as you say, you cannot ignore the history of colonisation that's happened in Aotearoa. There's a reason why 70% of the women who are homeless are wahine Māori. You have got its landlessness, it's homelessness within their own land. So you've got a whole history there that we can't ignore. And then you put on top of that all of the other issues of there's alienation from land, there's alienation from language, but then you've got the rates of incarceration and what's actually happened with incarceration, and what happens for people when they are released from prison, and the lack of care that's shown at that stage. And we certainly see that in Christchurch, where we've got 3 prisons within the Canterbury region, plus of course you've got psychiatric hospitals who are also discharging people without the necessary care and follow-up plans, and also our public hospital and the emergency department, who is not able to do anything further to a person, so releases them back into homelessness. What the duty of care would do, and I know a little bit about it in terms of the UK, whereas there is a duty of care from the local authority. The local authorities in the UK provide the social services. So in our stage, it'll probably be the government would have a duty of care and a duty of responsibility to ensure a package of care for any adult who is deemed vulnerable. And that includes any adult who is homeless. So there would need to be a package of care put around that person, and if somebody is concerned that somebody is not being cared for, make a report of concern in much the same way as we do with our oranga tamariki legislation. So I think we do need to look at a new lens through which we can see homelessness and come from a much more compassionate approach than we do at the moment.
Mm. And I know it's been a long day, but I have to ask, do you believe we can fix this? Right, great. Can we deal with homelessness in Aotearoa, New Zealand?
Absolutely. We're a small country. We're a small country with a lot of resources. We have to choose where we're going to invest, what we're going to invest in. We know from all of the research that's been done, you invest in housing, the outcomes are great. They're great for whānau, they're great for women, they're great for older people. We just need to actually do some investment in housing.
So I'm going to give you a policy pitch opportunity here. It's election year, it's 2026 in Aotearoa. I know many of the parties will have already written their manifestos, but now we're speaking to voters. What are some of the major policy interventions that you think would make the biggest difference and turn the dial in terms of building a truly responsive and effective housing system in Aotearoa for all our people?
We need a cross-party agreement with a housing strategy for the next 10 years. We can't just keep doing this ping-pong from one, election to the next. We need something solid with housing. And my policy pitch would be to move that 4% towards 10%, have a 10-year strategy where we're increasing it by a percentage a year, where we're building more affordable, more social housing, more good quality housing, for people, and then we'll see the benefits of that in terms of kids not having to move schools the whole time. You'll have your educational achievement. You'll see older people not having to go to hospital so often because they're so much healthier. We'll see families thriving.
Beautiful.
That would be my pitch.
I like that pitch. Jill, we're preparing for an Insight Report edition looking at policy and wisdom. And I know wisdom's a big word, but one of the ways we talk about it is identifying those things and sharing those things that we know have worked really well and delivered great outcomes, and trying to find ways of doing more of those more often and in more places. And so I wonder if, as you reflect on the work that you have done, do you have some examples that are top of mind of things that have just gone great that we could just do more of?
That's a great question. I want to start and say, I think we've got to see the housing, if you're talking policies, housing is a human right. You know, if we start from a framework of housing as a human right, then everything else actually flows from it. It's not a privilege, it's a right for everybody. So how do we ensure that the right kind of housing with the right kind of support goes hand in hand? And where we've seen what works really well, a couple of examples. We have a housing complex called Wharetiaki. Wharetiaki is actually a converted rest home, which had, it's got ensuite bedrooms. So bedrooms with en-suites, and then it's got a shared kitchen, dining, living area. And we've developed it specifically for kaumātua Māori, who we saw had a real need for some housing where they also receive some support. So it's not rest home level care, it's not independent living. For 3 or 4 hours a day, kai awhina come in and prepare 2 meals, dinner and lunch. People get their own breakfast, but they live together as community. And they go out to local marae, to kaumātua days, and they participate in regular waiata or karakia. They are, and what we've found is a number of kaumātua Māori have come in to Wharetiaki. It's a little bit like a gateway and a doorway into our wider Wesley village. And some have stayed and loved living communally. Others have said, actually, that's not for me. I like my privacy. I'd like to go and live in the village in an independent place, and have been able to make that transition. And for some, they've come in, particularly those at the early stages of dementia, and actually haven't been able to cope and have moved into a more appropriate home. So that's been a really a great model for us, connecting with local hapu and iwi, and with whānau who are really looking for some support with their kaumātua.
Beautiful, good example. Have you got any others?
Oh, the others are the obvious ones. Housing First has made such an incredible impact and has been so successful as a model. And you just look at those rates of the decrease in hospitalisation, the decrease in terms of mental health admissions, people flourishing, people who have been homeless now being part of our staff team, people going on to employment. Housing First's a model that really works.
So if we were going to tie those two examples and others into a policy environment, what would that look like? Is that simply just turning up the dial because the policy's kind of already there, or is it more than that?
I think it's a mixture of getting the housing and the support right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, our biggest challenge we've got with Housing First at the moment is we've got over 100 people on our waiting list. We're providing support to them, so they're not waiting for that, so they're getting our support, but we can't find them housing. So we're basically supporting them while they're still living on the street.
Because the funding for the housing's not there.
Because there just aren't enough 1 or 2 bedroom houses that we're able to get either from the private sector or from the state sector, or from community housing providers.
Okay, understood. And as we lean more and more into potential policy that could assist with the responsiveness of the New Zealand housing system and making sure that it's performing well, particularly for low and moderate income households with persistent unmet housing need. Any other thoughts there in terms of where we need to go in terms of our policy direction?
You only need to look at the social housing register. The majority of people on the social housing register need a one-bedroom place. We just need to get out and build some one-bedroom places, some of them being accessible, all with universal design. It's not rocket science. We just need to do it.
And is that on central government, or can we involve local government in this conversation and others as well?
We certainly needs a whole of community response. Everyone's got to pull their levers. So central government obviously needs to invest funding in it. And it is an investment. It's not pouring money down the drain. It's an investment, and it's an investment for the future. Local authorities need to actually pull their levers, what they might be. So it might be rebates on development contributions and so on. Community housing providers, we can do the building. We've got experience in building new housing developments and knowing what's appropriate for people. But we've also got an important role in providing support for people and providing the community support. So we've all got our roles to play.
Jill, it's really interesting hearing you talk about the lack of the smaller typologies, 1 and 2 bedroom homes. And I'm aware in terms of construction economics that typically they're more expensive because you've got kitchens and bathrooms and around 1 bedroom, and bedrooms are actually cheap to deliver. And so there's an economic driver there perhaps. We've just started a new procurement process with the central government and a flexible fund. There's a word in there describing their desire to see modest houses, which is not defined. Which levers do we need to pull in order to get the outcomes that are most needed? Because I'm hearing loud and clear what you're saying there's a deficit of. How do we work together with central and local government to get those outcomes that we need so much?
I think the first thing we need to do is acknowledge the private sector is not going to deliver. They're not going to deliver 1-bedroom houses for all of the reasons you just said. You look at all of the new housing that's being built around Christchurch at the moment, and it's all living room, kitchen, downstairs, upstairs to 2 bedrooms, not suitable for older people at all, not suitable for anybody with disability. So the only people who really have been building 1-bedroom places are Kaingaora and the community housing provider sector. So that's what we need. So what's it going to take for them to be able to build? What can council do? Certainly inclusionary zoning, I think, is really important. We do need to have much more mixed communities across, as we have had in the past. So that's certainly a lever that can be pulled, as well as things like rebates on development contributions, and the councils could look at rates, rebates, and so on, or incentives to actually build some of these smaller homes.
Jill, there's a conversation that we're in favour of from a community housing perspective, which is along the lines of, if we could encourage New Zealand and the public and central government and local government to think about housing, especially affordable housing for low and moderate income households, which the market does not look after. If we could think of housing as social infrastructure, as an investment in social infrastructure, then we would think about it differently, plan for it differently, finance it differently, and deliver it differently on a much longer term horizon that's less susceptible to 3-year electoral cycles. Have you got any comments on that?
No, I think you've summed it up absolutely beautifully.
Right.
Yeah,
so we should do that.
I think the issue is not ping-ponging back. We're in the stage that Kaingaora is all the flavour for one government, and then the next one, no, they'd stop all the funding for Kaingaora and say they're going to put the chip sector on steroids that they don't do anyway. We've just got to stop that. We've got to see housing as a social good, as a human right, and get a cross-party agreement that we're going to start doing some building.
Jill, thank you. We very much appreciate your time and your wisdom. Thank you.
We'd like to thank Jill for taking the time to speak with us. More information on this interview can be found in the episode description. And don't forget to subscribe to the Cha Hub podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from.